introduce our guest speaker tonight, who is Burt Wilson. And I've known Burt now for a couple of years. He attends so many of the meetings in Sacramento and all over about the BBCP and the Delta Plan and on, all of it. He's been a strong advocate, longtime advocate for our Delta. He's from the Elk Grove area, so maybe some of you don't know that there are people out there supporting our Delta that don't live right here close to ground zero. But Burt does. He's everywhere, and I think you're really going to enjoy what he has to say tonight. So Burt, thank you for coming.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Barbara, and also Anna. Also, it's very nice to be here. I spent all day yesterday in a workshop with the scientists who were talking about fish in the Delta, and one after the other said, the fish are going to die, they're endangered, they can't exist. And it just went on and on like that all day. But anyway, it came time for my public comment, and I went up to him and I said, I really got my stomach full of fish today, and it reminds me of what the great comedian W.C. Fields said. He said, I only drink whiskey, I never drink water because fish fornicate in it. So, I guess that's a good enough reason anyway. But anyway, back in 1982, when you were all little boys and girls, I was working on the anti-peripheral canal campaign. I was on staff, and that was a great campaign. We won because we had Boswell money behind us. They were afraid they weren't going to get the water, and it was the biggest defeat that Jerry Brown's ever had in his history. 2/3 of the people in California voted against the peripheral canal. And that was just another water grab, and we all knew it. In Northern California, they know it's a water grab. In Southern California, where I worked on the campaign, they know it's too expensive. That's the tactic he used to win. And we did win. And it went fine. And we thought it was all over. But then, all of a sudden, it started to creep in again. Somebody's talking about the Delta Vision Committee, and they're talking about conveyance. And then Schwarzenegger is down in Bakersfield in some obscure Grange Hall, and he's saying, we need a conveyance of some kind. And that's what in politics is known as a trial balloon, to see if it floats up. And so right away my ears pricked up, and it said, another water grab is on the way. And I don't know if many of you know how the BBCP and all of this mess began. I'm going to tell you. It began with the California Business Roundtable and the California Chamber of Commerce. And you can read it on their website. They said on their website, we expect 20 million people to come to California in the next 20 years, and most of them will end up in the Southland. And where? Los Angeles is built up to the north, it's built up to the west, it's built up to the south. The only place you can build in Southern California for new people is the east and the high desert areas. And that's what they want the water for. To build in the high desert areas where there's no water now. Because you can't build, unless you have water. That's a state law. So this whole thing started. Ed Zarenberg, the president of the California Chamber of Commerce, went to the law firm of Nielsen, Merksimer, et al., and had them draw up a water plan, which included a conveyance. This was in 2006. You can see all this on the internet, but people don't know. And then they started to form the BBCP, which when it began was all water agency people. Can you imagine? And little by little the propaganda came out. The big thing they were missing from the 1982 campaign was they had nothing for the environmentalists. So this time we're going to give the environmentalists all voted against the peripheral canal. This time they wanted to entice them with habitat restoration and the so-called co-equal goals, which are actually mutually exclusive because you can't save the delta by taking more water from it. It's as simple as that. And so this thing began to get legs, and then somebody discovered that the water agencies were controlling the BBCP and it didn't look good. So they brought on Jerry Merrill. Jerry Merrill fired about 6 or 7 or 8 of the board members and put other people on who weren't connected to water agencies but were politically benign. They were just there on the board for purposes. He then instituted the old divide and conquer idea. We're going to have 14 different committees, and they're all going to visit now and then and so forth. Well, this lasted about 2 months because nobody came to the meetings of the 14. It eventually ended in one public committee, and that's where it was the last time I was there. Then they put in their first EIS effects analysis. This was soundly trashed. You can't believe. The National Academy of Science said it's nothing more than justification of a conveyance. And that's exactly what it was. This was an effects analysis. So they went back to the drawing boards. About this time then, they finally came up with a couple of ideas where we're going to build tunnels. Now, when you build tunnels, you see, where do you get the idea to build tunnels? Well, they're building tunnels over in China. So we can build tunnels here. Then we won't have to buy a property on the surface, and we can avoid all of these entanglements and all this and all that. The problem is, nobody knew how to build tunnels. They still don't know how to build tunnels. It's beyond their vision. They don't have anybody at the DWR that knows how to build tunnels. And so they've just been limping along as if they knew what they're doing, but they don't know what they're doing. And they go from, we're now on the 3rd EIS, and it was just soundly trounced again by the battery of scientists of the Independent Science Board. And they're going to go for a 4th time now. Remember, if they file a 4th EIS, they're included in the Guinness Book of World Records for filing EIS. I mean, this is so ridiculous, I can't believe it. The legislature in 2009 passed the water bill. Well, Jerry Brown wants the water bill. He wants to have his legacy in the Delta like his father had with the SWP. And so imagine all these committee chairmen who have to vet the BBCP. They all owe their jobs to Jerry Brown. Guess which way it's going to go. So this thing just takes on a life of its own and absolutely goes nowhere. There's this thing of they're making work to make it look like they're doing something. The EIR, the one they just filed, was 35,000 pages long. This is an old government tactic. We'll smother them with paperwork and hope that they get tired of going through it and they'll vet it just to get rid of it. But it's not happening. People are absolutely taking a look at it. Let me tell you something I uncovered. I'm reading the chapter on air pollution, okay? I don't want to read all 35,000 pages, just a few chapters here and there. And I go to a DSC meeting, Delta Stewardship Council, and they have an ICF correspondent there who's saying, we're going to zero out air pollution in the Delta. We're going to zero it out. Well, okay, let's look at the Delta. Let's imagine a Delta workplace. Diesel trucks, 24 hours a day, carrying muck to God knows where. Diesel lights at night running. Diesel engines running pile drivers every 7 seconds that hit metal on metal, and everything else in the workplace. This is a bundle of greenhouse gases and toxic chemicals and particulate matter. plus you take the temperature inversion in the delta that holds it in there, who's going to work there? Well, we're going to zero it out. How are you going to zero it out? I said, well, we're going to use offsets. Now, do you all know what offsets are? You see, they don't explain it. I'll tell you what offsets are. They're going to use the cap and trade laws to buy carbon credits from San Francisco. So they zero it out on paper, but the pollution doesn't move to San Francisco, it stays in the Delta. And they're going to send the work people into a polluted atmosphere to build the tunnels. Now, that kind of thinking at this high level of government, I don't know whether it's consistent with today or not, but anyway, that's what's been going on. There's been several other things too. I tried, to me as a journalist, what you have to do is you want to go in and you want to find the issue that controls all the other issues. Then you can start writing about it. So the first couple of years I studied everything about the Delta, and to me the issue that controlled all other issues was how fast does the water have to flow past Chips Island in order to keep salinity out of the Delta. Okay? I phoned up the DWR Public Relations. We'll have that tomorrow for you, Mr. Wilson. No answer. I went to various organizations, and I always meet a DWR guy there, glad handing everybody. I want to know how much it is. Okay, we'll have that for you tomorrow, Mr. Wilson. 5 times I never got a phone call. Finally, I sent an email to the State Water Board, and they sent me an email back, and they said, Mr. Wilson, it'll take a flow of 11,400 cubic feet per second past Chips Island to keep the salinity out of the Delta. Now, what does that mean? Anything less than 11,400, you've got salinity invasion, you've got fish problems, you've got people problems, you've got all sorts of these problems. This is the whole thing. So what does the DWR do? They have on their books plans to use a water barrier gate imported from the Netherlands to stretch across Chips Island to keep the high tides when they come out of it for bringing salinity in the Delta if the flow isn't fast enough down the Sacramento River. Now, but what they don't tell you, and the fact that they have it on the books means they expect this to happen. I told them you're going to drain the Sacramento River dry. The fact of the matter is, they would have to raise the levees 5 feet on the San Francisco Bay side of the water barriers, all the way back to the bay to keep the tide when it comes in from spilling over the banks and flooding that area. Yes, sir.
Where's Chips Island?
Where's what?
Chips Island. Where it is? Where's the location?
It's about maybe 10 miles from Antioch. It's where those
Up the San or below Antioch.
Where is it? Relationship to
It's the San Joaquin River flows into the Sacramento River near Antioch, and then it goes to Chips Island a few miles down. That's where this is.
So that's where they want to build this gate?
Yes, if things go. A couple of weeks ago, I was in a meeting in Walnut Grove where they were saying, we've got to lick this problem of salinity. Were you there in Walnut Grove when the DWR was there? They said, this problem of salinity, And I went up to them later and I said, salinity is not the problem. Salinity is the result of the problem of mismanaging the flows in the Sacramento River, which is right in your lap. And that's exactly where it is. But the DWR, they're become masters at deflecting criticism off on something else. And they must have their propaganda people working overtime to try to convince people that black is white. So we've got all of this happening at the same time. Now, what do we think that the DWR funding, let me talk about funding for a minute, okay? They haven't got the funding in place. They can't find people, the funding. The water agency, 7 water agencies are supposed to fund it. Now, there are 2 ways to fund public projects. General obligation bonds, which must be voted on by the people, or revenue bonds, which don't have to be voted on by the people. Do you think Jerry Brown's going to go the general obligation bond? No, because he lost by such a big, back in 1982. So they're going to do revenue bonds. That means that the 7 water agencies headed by Westlands are going to come up with billions of dollars to provide a revenue stream to the Department of Water and Power, which will then issue revenue bonds to pay for it. They've got nothing in place as we speak right now. There is not a thing in place, and this is disturbing quite a lot of people because they can't fund it. They can't fund it, and they can't save the fish. And if they try to save the fish, then they can't save the people, and they can't save the farms. This pollution problem, the pollution that I just spoke about, that's really the Achilles heel of the whole Bay Delta Conservation Plan, because you cannot get rid of the pollution. All you can do is zero it out on paper. That means if you were a union manager and your union people were supposed to work in the Delta, would you send them down into a death trap to work in the Delta? I mean, there are all of these things that are coming out now. It's like somebody saying, oh, well, you've had a good 3-year run, but from now on we're going to leak this stuff out little by little so that people know what's really going on. When Schwarzenegger signed the water bill in November of 2009, where do you think he went to sign it? He went to Los Angeles. He was elevated to the level of a saint in Los Angeles on this day. You can see all the video on the internet. Schwarzenegger is this and that. Who are the biggest people eulogizing Schwarzenegger? The building industries, the construction industries, because they know it needs work in the east part of the Delta. That's what the whole thing is all about. To get the water down there. When they tell us that we're not going to take, the biggest lie is we're not going to take any new water from the Delta, okay? Well, describe new, please. They can hardly do that, you see. They are going to take X amount of water. But they do have people who can, if they want to ignore the governor, clamp down on water exports. So what's been happening? The DWR has quite secretly been building water intakes all over the upper Sacramento River. Water diversion intakes, okay? Where do they go? They filter down into the valley and eventually into the Clifton Court Bay. The biggest one is the spillway in front of the Folsom Dam. They just completed it a couple of months ago. It was $20, $30, $40 million project. I looked at the specs of that. The specs said that this project was built because of a 1% chance that Folsom Dam might overflow and flood the surrounding valley. 1% chance. It just so happens that when you open up the gates and run water off the Folsom Dam into the spillway, it goes down here and ends up in the McElroy River, which carries it to the Clifton Court Bay. So you see, they have all these ways of getting more water south than they're telling us. And in case the restrictions on fish and wildlife and everything become too much for them, then they've got these devious ways of dealing with it. I heard a rumor before I came here tonight. Now this is just a rumor, okay? They said that they're going to put the BDCP and the water barriers on hold, okay? That's just a rumor. But even so, you can almost believe it because nothing is working in the BDCP. The funding isn't working. The water efforts to send water south isn't working. None of it is working. And so we're left with a peripheral canal from back then. And that's what's happening today. It's just not happening because they can't make it work. Nobody knows how to make it work. And so what do? Well, we have meetings like this. To me, if you write a letter to Governor Brown and tell him that the DWR is a wall of lies and you're not buying the twin tunnels, I mean, that, you don't have to pull your punches because that's the truth. They're lying to you. They're lying to you day and night about the things in the Delta. So that's what I recommend that each of you do. We never worried about losing the campaign in 1982. We were nowhere going to win. In fact, the other political consultants told us it's yours to lose. And I think in Southern California, with the problems now they're having with San Diego Water District pulling away from the MWD, that's going to be a problem for them down there. Now, an activist friend of mine in the 1970s later went over to the dark side and became chairman of the board of the MWD. And we were still friends. And I asked him one time, are you overdrafting your limits on taking water from the Delta? And he sent me a chart that showed me that they weren't. But the chart had something else on it too. It showed the water exports from 2002 to 2006 going up like this. It showed the imports from the Colorado River going down like this. The DWR, for 4 to 5 years, surreptitiously, without telling anybody, made up the Colorado River loss of the MWD with Delta water. And you get those 40-foot pumps, 2 40-foot pumps, rolling night and day to send that water down there. I mean, that all the reverse flows in the Delta, the levees get whipsawed. What do you think ruined the levees? It finally took a Judge Wenger, to stop that whole thing in 2006, and that's where it's been since then. Thank God, nothing worse has happened then. But this vetting process we're going through right now, it's kind of, everything is in limbo. But the limbo is worse than they're letting on, and the limbo is worse than you think. Each day brings a new development. I want to tell you one last thing. The consultants they hire, millions of dollars are spending on consultants. There's a new code word now among the water agencies, and the code word is uncertainty. Okay, you will find all of these programs saying, well, that's uncertain, or it's an uncertainty. Just yesterday, Diane, the head of the State Water Board, says, we'll always have uncertainties. See, what they're trying to do is mix uncertainties with adaptive management. Now, adaptive management is what I call crisis management. Let me just go into this a little bit. Dr. Peter Goodwin, the head of the Independent Science Board, has a thing called One Science, One Delta. But lately they've come on with the collaborative science adaptive management program. It's in an equal area with the Independent Science Board. So right now, instead of 1 Delta 1 Science, we have 1 Delta 2 Science. And adaptive management, which I call crisis management, means, well, if you run into a problem, if you run into an uncertainty, you stop everything and adapt to the situation to get around it. Well, uncertainty now, see, they can't pass the ERS with all the imperfections in it, which the Independent Science Board found a few weeks ago. They will never vet the EIS in that manner. So, the adaptive management program, they're going to raise the word uncertainty from a negative to a positive. Now, how does that work? Well, anything that the scientists find won't work, they'll call it an uncertainty and then put it in a pile called adaptive management. So when they come to vet the EIS again, there will be no inconsistencies for the science people. There will be a lump, there will be a program of uncertainties which are going to be taken care of by adaptive management, which means we'll work that out when we come to it. Can they really get home with that? I don't think so. But they're going to try. They're going to try. So it behooves us to really stay with our minds on what's happening here. Do not become discouraged. Do not think that you're being overwhelmed, because you're not. It's actually the water agencies which are being overwhelmed by us. So I want to thank you all for your participation in fighting the water pirates on Canal here in the Delta, and I commend you all, and I thank you very much for letting me talk to you tonight.
Do you think that the Independent Science Board is going to capitulate to the process then? Is that what you're thinking, or?
Well, I was just thinking that yesterday. I was wondering the same thing, because it's going to, the Independent Science Board, when they first announced it, this was 3 years ago, and all the scientists came here, I testified to that, and I said, you're going to have a lot of political pressure put on you. So you've got to work hard to maintain your independence. I have faith in Dr. Peter Goodwin and his people that they're going to be independent. I do not have faith in this new program called Scientific Adaptive Management. And so we need to watch when push comes to shove between those two, because the BBCP now is such in disarray that they're going to try to make imperfections be uncertainties which can be cured by adaptive management, and therefore all right in the vetting process. We'll take care of it somehow.
You're not saying that the Independent Science Board is going to go along with that notion or that concept. You're not saying that the Independent Science Board will go along with that process. You're just saying that's what the contractors are
No,
going to do.
the Independent Science Board are the good guys.
Okay, I mean, they're going to stay the good guys.
I mean, I went and testified to the Independent Science Board a month and a half ago, and I told them, I said,
You did a good job.
I said, why do you, well, I told them about the pollution, and you should have seen them all perk up. And then I said, why do we need 2 forebays? Why do we need a forebay with fresh water? And they looked at me again. I said, because it's perfect for fracking. There's no fish in it. Why do you think they just hauled 800,000 acre-feet of water out of the Delta, pumped it out, even though we were in a drought, down to Stuart Resnick's Kern water bank, so he can sell at preposterous prices to the oil companies for fracking? In Greeley, Colorado, they sell water to farmers for $30 an acre foot. They sell it to the fracking oil companies for $3,300 an acre foot. So you see, southern sending water south is where the money is. That's where the money is. It's all about money and business. And when you've got the two biggest political entities in the state, the Business Roundtable and the Chamber of Commerce behind you, very few people will go against that.
Bert, who's on the hook for the adaptive management cost? Say they got this through and then they need to do more things, who's going to pay for all the costs and all the other things they need to do?
Who's going to pay for adaptive management?
Boy, that's a good question. How many of you have been to Seattle, Pioneer Square? They're digging a 2-mile tunnel under near Pioneer Square right now. How'd you like to have a tunnel in that sand, 60 feet down? And they ran into a big boulder, which they didn't discover. And it sheared off all of the grinding materials on the tunnel build. Now, this project was built on what is called a design and build plan. A design and build plan means the contractor says, I will finish it in so many days at this amount. Then if he finishes it sooner, he's made money. If he finishes it later, he has to eat the cost. You see, he has to eat the cost overruns. With adaptive management and everything like that, as they do now, with the revenue bonds, you're going to have cost overruns. Every month they have an adaptive management crisis. And what construction company is going to go in on that basis?
Let me ask you, what involvement did Bechtel have? Bechtel Engineering Company in San Francisco, they're funding a lot of these studies that have been done about sending salmon down from about Fremont Weir on the other side of the river. And I think that gets them going to buy these intake structures put over here in Bechtel. I understand the only company that's big enough to build a tunnel project right now. So how much money are they putting into this? How much input for that?
Quick question.
Bechtel funds the DPIC, as you probably know, the Public Policy Institute of California, which issues public policy. When the first report from the Public Policy Institute came out, it advocated a peripheral canal, like back in 1982. Why? Because Bechtel builds peripheral canals. Unfortunately, Bechtel doesn't drill tunnels, as far as I know. But Bechtel just hired Phil Eisenberg to be on the board of the Public Policy Institute. It just came out 2 days ago. So guess what?
Are you putting that on your letter next week?
What?
Are you going to put that on your letter next week about Iceberg?
Yeah.
Good.
The poor fish, the entrainment of the fish, the slaughter of the fish. If you could see pictures of salvaged fish, it's a truly a mess. And the mess is because I go back to this time and time again. The BBCP does not know what they're doing, and they haven't known what they're doing ever since they started. They're trying to follow a concept which was doomed, actually, from the beginning. But they're still, we've got to go through. And they've been through management change after management change after management change. I remember in one meeting with Letty Baylor, who was from the Department of the EPA, the federal thing. And I asked her in the meeting, I said, is Delta water going to be used for fracking? She says, well, I'm not going to answer that question right now, but I want to tell you. So this is the way it's been, you see. You can't get it. And now we have Dianne Feinstein, you see, who diverting water to Stuart Resnick through her husband, Richard Bloom. Richard Bloom, Di-Fi's husband, you know the highway that leaves Los Angeles and goes through the Mojave Desert?
Yeah.
He owns property on both sides of that highway. That's all it is. So think about if we're going to send water to Southern California to build houses and stuff. Guess it's going to give a payoff for that. Any more questions? Yes, sir.
What do you think their next plan is going to be, basically?
You should know